All right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to Aparo's Nonprofit Bites and Insights. These are a webinar series that are tailored just for nonprofit professionals. We have amazing speakers and experts from all different industries who come to generously share their knowledge and insights with us. Today's webinar is focusing on bucking the trend, innovative nonprofit fundraising. And we are so lucky to have two incredibly knowledgeable speakers, Steve Latham and Diane Chips Bailey, to teach us all about non-cash giving. For those of you who have joined us in the past, maybe last month, you're going to see a familiar face. We have the lovely Allie Brooke returning to help moderate this conversation. So before I turn it all over to them, quick housekeeping details. So this webinar is being recorded and it will be uploaded to our YouTube channel as well as our website. But all of you attending today, you will receive a follow-up email from me and you'll get that direct link as well as copies of the slide decks and some amazing resources that Donate Stock has provided us. Q&A box and chat box are available for you to use. We do ask that you drop all your questions into the Q&A, and please feel free to drop in those questions at any time throughout this presentation. Chat box is also available for you to use. Just drop in comments, have conversation. In fact, there's quite a few of us in the room already, so why don't we get that chat box warmed up? Drop in your name, share what organization you're with, and where you're coming from. While you're doing that, really quickly about Aparo, if you're new to what we do, first of all, welcome. So Aparo is a nonprofit. We are based in Charlotte, North Carolina. And what we do is we help other nonprofits with their technology needs and challenges. The model that we use is we connect nonprofits with skilled volunteers and corporations. And together as a team, we help that nonprofit amplify their impact in the communities and populations that we serve. We have a number of services, but don't worry. What will happen is when you are interested in a service, we will connect you one-on-one with the tech therapist and just have a conversation with them. And they're going to help make sure you get connected with the right service. So some of those services include one-on-one coaching, guidance to resources and solutions, getting connected with vendors, team trainings for your staff, and also larger projects where we make sure you get a solution that is tailored to your nonprofit need. I do want to quickly mention our grant program that's still open up until this Friday. So this is our GAIN grant program. This is a one-year nonprofit accelerator program where nonprofits will get equipped with tools like laptops, as well as training and other supports to help get implementing some of your technology dreams or process improvements. This is only open for nonprofits in the greater Charlotte area. And again, you have 2 more days to get those applications in. So if you are interested, please do that as soon as possible. Lastly, these are the different ways to connect with us. If or when you decide you are interested in a service with Aparo, the best way is to go to our website and submit a request. You can also subscribe to our email list to stay updated on our programming. You can email me. I'm happy to help. And if you like what we do, please consider writing a short Google review. I see a lot of people dropping in the chat. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and go ahead and turn it over to our speakers. Allie, I think you're going to be kicking us off as soon as the slide decks are up.
Awesome. Thank you, Yan-Ting, and hello, everybody. Excited to be back here, and we have a wonderful, a lot of information that will be coming as we all know that fundraising has been down, and as we move into this new age and where things are going, there are new and other alternative ways. And today, just grab the information, ask questions, and how this came to be. I met Steve. Steve has a passion for helping to donate stocks, and he and I met, and I was part of a small group that was helping with advising. And as soon as I heard about his organization, I knew that more people needed to know about this great opportunity and what else could be out there and an education component. As some of you know, I used to sit at a Paro and was on the fundraising side. And so I have dealt with, from a personal level as being a donor, as well as on the nonprofit side as receiving stocks. And sometimes that can be really challenging. And Steve has an organization that he's going to share about that can help make things easier. So I want to introduce this incredible panel. Diane Bailey. So she is the Managing Director and National Philanthropic Strategy Executive for Philanthropic Solutions for Bank of America and Private Bank, as well as Steve Latham, the co-founder and CEO of Donate Stocks. And today they are both going to share a lot of information about non-cash giving and ways that you can help your organizations to reach out. So we are going to cover today assessments of the giving landscape, challenges that we're facing as nonprofits, and the untapped sources of funding and how to capture them, from donor advised funds to qualified charitable distributions, appreciated security, stock giving. And then we will move into questions and answers. So please continue to put in your chat questions that you have, and we will get to that towards the end. And we look forward to really sharing this information to help all of your nonprofits and to help with new ideas for non-cash giving. So I will hand this over to Diane.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Allie. Appreciate very much your introduction, and I'm so happy to be here with Steve to talk through strategies to increase your overall fundraising. And before we dive into some of the tactics, Steve and I want to give you some insights into the current landscape. You certainly are experiencing much of what we'll describe today on the front lines with your organizations, but having a macro view, I think it's helpful to prioritize and strategize for going forward. So the first thing we know is from research, and some of the data I'll be sharing today comes from two primary sources. The first is Giving USA, and the second is the Bank of America study of philanthropy. Giving USA is probably a report that many of you are familiar with, and that looks at giving by all Americans on an annual basis. The new report for 2022 came out earlier this summer in June, and we saw really important insights into the decline, one of only 3 years of declines in recent decades in giving overall when adjusted for inflation. Almost to that $500 billion watermark, a staggering number. Americans are incredibly generous, but certainly moving away from the trajectories up that we'd seen with the rebound following the Great Recession. One of the most important things to know about the big picture for charitable giving is that 85% of gifts come from individuals and families. I'm going to say that again. 85% of gifts come from individuals and families. As board members, as executives with nonprofits, as frontline fundraisers for nonprofits, oftentimes we're, I think, rather seduced by the big numbers that can come out of corporate foundations, staffed institutional foundations. But what we know is that that's a very small percentage of giving overall. So the 85%, that combines giving from just direct contributions, as well as family foundations, and also bequests. Perhaps a topic for another day. We're seeing, bequests continue to provide very, very important sources of funding for individuals, and will be only increase in their importance over time, given shifting demographics among donors. So what do we know about giving from affluent donors. That's the research from the Bank of America study of philanthropy. And the reason why we study affluent Americans, wealthy Americans in their giving, is because they continue to carry the day. As many know, again, from their work with nonprofits, that we're increasingly relying on a smaller and much more affluent circle of donors to meet our fundraising goals. This $43,000 an average given by the affluent households is from 2020, which was a high watermark. That was, of course, the year of the pandemic, our increased awareness around the lack of racial justice in this country, and the generosity that followed was extraordinary. Our new research is coming out in just under a month. October 3rd will be the release of the 2023 Bank of America study of philanthropy, looking at giving last year. I won't spoil the headlines, but keep your eyes open for that. And so that's a multiplier effect of the $2,500 that's given on average from the general population. Next slide, please. So when you look at affluent Americans, and how do we define that term? To be able to participate in our research study, you need to qualify as an accredited investor. And so that would be either $200,000 in household income for an individual, or $300,000 for combined household income, or a net worth of $1 million outside of the value of your primary residence. So it's roughly the top 10% of Americans in terms of income and or wealth. And of those individuals, you'd see, roughly 90% are giving on an annual basis. Women outpaced men in their giving and in their volunteering, I would add. One of my favorite projects is working with the Women's Philanthropy Institute from the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, where we study all of the differences in gender in giving and volunteering and broader social engagement. And we do see women exercise their commitment in really significant ways, outpacing men. But if you look at other demographic characteristics of wealthy Americans and their giving, you see generosity really across the board. If you look at it by ethnicity, age, LGBTQ plus status, you see all of these groups being very generous, particularly when compared with the general population, because in the general population, fewer than half are giving on an annual basis. This is a steep decline from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, where you saw 2/3 of Americans overall giving on an annual basis. We really saw that retraction in the Great Recession, and it never bounced back. Lots of reasons why that would be. One statistic I will point out is if you look at millennials and Gen Z, already 4 out of 5 of that age group is prioritizing charitable giving, which I think is really encouraging for the future. Next slide, please. So where are affluent Americans giving? Far and away, the largest category continues to be giving to religion, so places of worship, temple, mosque, synagogue, church, but we do see significant declines there, changing patterns of religiosity and membership in formal religious groups. But then, the other categories that are really popular shouldn't be surprising. Basic needs, certainly education, particularly when you combine higher education and K through 12. But then you see a fairly significant drop off and get into single digits. And note that this is wallet share. So this is not incidence of giving. This is what proportion of your giving goes to each of these categories. Next slide, please. This is really the most important part of the research from the Bank of America study of philanthropy, which are donor motivations. It's interesting to know where people are giving, but what's even more important from your fundraising perspective is to understand why they're giving. And far and away, year over year, we see resoundingly that the number one reason why people give is because of their personal values. It's not your case for support. It's certainly not the presentation of that case in glossy brochures and slick social media. It's really how their personal values connect with your institutional priorities. It's really that Venn diagram where they intersect that's so important to identify. We'll talk more about what that means for your strategies, but I do want you to hold on to this really important data point, because it does counsel to commit to a donor-centric fundraising plan. Next slide, please. So with that, I will turn it over to Steve to give you some more insights into the landscape as it exists and also how it's changing.
Thanks, Diane. So as mentioned, 22 was the first material decline in giving since 2010. If you go back all that way and look at the inflation adjusted giving, or sorry, in the current dollars, it's just, these were tough years, and unfortunately it looks like 22 and 23 may be challenging as well. So last year, individual giving fell about 6.5%. This is if you just remove the foundations, just look at just individuals, which is around 300 billion. About 13% of that decrease, if you think about inflation, is due to numerous factors. There wasn't just one reason. There was really a confluence of factors. The decline in the number of donors. This, to me, when I heard this, was really surprising that there are almost 20% fewer donors than less today than a decade ago, which is really surprising. That, as Diane mentioned, used to be 2/3 of U.S. households gave to nonprofits or charity or schools, hospitals, community foundations. Today, it's less than half. So despite this amazing creation of wealth we've had over the last couple of decades, we're actually less generous as a whole. Donor attrition is another big problem. And this is not all the donors' fault. This is something I think we all have to look at really carefully, which is realizing only 18% of people that gave in 21 gave for the first time gave in 22, and only 60% of repeat donors gave in 22, back to the same causes. It doesn't mean they didn't give, it just means they gave to somebody else. And I think this tends to coincide with the focus on major gifts and the mega donors, that reliance. The concerns about the inflation, market volatility, are we in recession? Is it coming? It's just, these are things that have just been on people's mind that have really impacted charitable giving. And there's also perception of reduced needs. 2020, 21 were amazing years for generosity based on just the humanitarian crisis we were in a few years ago. And now I think there's a belief that, well, nonprofits have plenty of cash. I gave a lot in 2021. They don't need my money as much today. Anyway, those may not be reality, but that is the perception. And we'd like to point out that if not for really the over-indexing by a few mega donors and all donating billions of dollars, the McKinsey Scott, Bill Gates, Bezos, Bloomberg's, et cetera, they comprised a big chunk of that, about 5% as well. So if not for their heroic efforts, the downturn would have been, or the drop would have been much greater. The outlook for 23 is also still pretty challenging. This is from a survey that's online, the Nonprofit Alliance survey. Basically, it looks like if you look at this, was 82% of surveyed fundraisers expect either break even or adjust downward from 22. So they're projecting at or below last year's level, which was for many of them below what the 21 levels were. And there's just, from that has come a growing need for revenue diversification, thinking beyond cash, thinking beyond credit card, thinking beyond checks, and really think about prioritizing more flexibility. And that's what we're going to talk about now. I'm going to kick it back to Diane to kick us off on the opportunities, as well as some of the instruments that you guys could be using.
Again, just taking another look at kind of the macro view here before we dive into some of these tactics with donor advised funds, qualified charitable distributions, and of course, gifts of appreciated securities. Just to remind ourselves what the wealth pyramid looks like in this country. Certainly cash is a very, very small percentage of the wealth in the country. Financial assets, so publicly traded securities, bonds, et cetera. That does comprise a significant portion of the assets, which is great news for giving gifts of stock at 30%. But the vast majority of the wealth is in these non-financial assets, which is a little bit beyond the scope of what we'll talk about today. We might hit a little bit of that in the Q&A, but these are closely held business interests, real estate, whether it's residential or commercial, oil and gas, farm, timberland, fine art, collectibles are all examples of these non-financial assets that also should be looked to as possible sources of funding for a charitable contribution. But notwithstanding this allocation of the wealth in the country, look at how we're giving as a nation. I mean, we're really limiting ourselves almost exclusively to that 7% to leverage for our gifts, with 95% of gifts just given by cash or check or credit card. So, really looking, organizations that look beyond that 7% to the 93% of assets where the wealth is really held in this country are the ones that are going to be well positioned to move forward their fundraising and certainly propel their missions. Next slide, please. And so look at the proof statement here. This is really, it's undeniable. If you look at organizations and their growth over 5 years in total fundraising, organizations that receive gifts of securities grow by 2/3. If you receive any non-cash gift, you're seeing 50% growth. But if you're limiting yourself to cash, credit cards, checks, you're only going to see that 11% growth over that 5-year period. And so, but look also at what happens when you shift the proportion of your contributions that are coming from these non-cash assets. So for example, when your total grows because you're gaining and attracting more gifts of securities, you're going to see growth of 18%. Likewise, when real estate constitutes a greater percentage of the assets that are contributed to your organization, you're going to see that 26% growth. But if you're limiting yourself to cash, and cash grows by more than 10% of the total of the gifts that you receive in a year, you're actually losing ground with a 13% decline if that composition shifts in that way to become more reliant on gifts of cash. Next slide, please. So the first of the 3 vehicles we're going to focus on today during the main part of the conversation are donor advised funds. And donor advised funds, they garner many headlines, both in the philanthropy trade press, but also in the general media. I will say donor advised funds are often maligned in ways that I think are unfair, given what we know. People that are really focused in the sector understand about donor advised funds, which is donor advised fund is really just a way to organize, streamline, and make more impactful, and frankly, more joyful, because it eliminates a lot of the administrative headaches that can be associated with giving gifts of check, credit card, and cash. Really, they're just a powerful way to amplify your charitable giving. And the concept is really very simple: give, grow, grant, right? So you give an asset to a donor advised fund sponsor, whether it's a financial services associated donor advised fund, like the Bank of America Charitable Gift Fund, or a national donor advised fund, like National Philanthropic Trust, or a community foundation, like here in Charlotte, the Foundation for the Carolinas. They're all these donor advised fund sponsors are 501c3s that host individual fund accounts. Because the assets in the donor advised fund often are invested, they can grow tax-free, which is a wonderful way to magnify giving over time. But then the most important part of the donor advised fund is that third element, grant. Particularly using online donor portals, it is a seamless way to quickly distribute assets from your donor advised fund to the operating charity that's actually conducting the programs. Many in the sector have described donor advised funds as the first responders in philanthropy. If you look at large staffed private foundations, you'll often see their period to obtain a gift, from the application to the grant award to the distribution of the funds. It can be a year, It can be 18 months. It can sometimes be longer. Whereas a donor advised fund holder just picks up their mobile phone and can recommend a grant seamlessly, just in a matter of seconds. So really important to think about donor advised funds as a source of contributions that's really very, very powerful. And they're continuing to grow over time. I won't go into all of these stats in the interest of time, but know that there are roughly 1.3 million donor advised fund accounts in the country, with assets close to $250 billion. So enormous potential funding. What's great to know about donor advised funds compared to private foundations is the payout rate is in aggregate in excess of 20% on an annual basis. And most people know that private foundations are only required to spend 5% of their assets. So you do see really significant utilization of donor advised funds. Anonymity can complicate things. Donor advised funds are able to give grants anonymously. And I will say, in my practical experience, sometimes they inadvertently give their grants anonymously. So it can be a little difficult from a donor stewardship perspective. Next slide, please. So when you're looking to access this almost $250 billion that is sitting in donor advised fund contributions, one of the most important things you'll do is increase your visibility. Make sure that your website, your social media, even your Form 990 are really telling your story. There used to be, I think, a misconception that donor advised funds were sort of the little brother or the little sister to private foundations, that they were somehow smaller, not as sophisticated, not as well resourced, and nothing could be further from the truth. Mackenzie Scott, for example, uses a donor advised fund to make her distributions. And only recently have you been able to apply for her support. Mostly she and her advisors have just been looking for great organizations that align with her vision around equity and helping marginalized communities. So also make it easy for your donors to give from their donor advised funds. Certainly making sure that your EIN is on your website, it's available, so they know how to find them in their donor advised fund portals. Sharing information about the power of donor advised funds, among other giving strategies, can be really, really, really helpful to inspire the imaginations of your donors. Donor advised fund holders tend to be really strategic givers. And so they want to partner with organizations that meet them where they are in their commitment to growing their expertise around philanthropy. I also think it's important to grow your network of financial advisors. Whether they're wealth advisors, accountants, attorneys, who are often in a position, particularly for bequests, to be able to make recommendations, but also are doing that for their donor advised fund holders as well. But the most important thing you can do, and it goes back to that key finding from the Bank of America study of philanthropy, is just build these authentic and trusting relationships with your current and prospective donors, really to understand their personal priorities, their personal passions, all driven by their values. So you can create that alignment between your organization's mission and the goals they want to achieve for social impact in our world. Next slide, please. So let's also talk about QCDs. When you think about the silver tsunami, right? The aging boomers, the silent generation that are so generous in their giving back to the community, both with their time and also with their money. 6 million retirees have retirement accounts, whether it's in a 401k or an IRA. And if they don't take a required minimum distribution, an RMD, there are significant implications from that, including tax. And so, looking to QCDs, qualified charitable distributions, which can be made in lieu of taking an RMD, is incredibly powerful. The Secure 2.0 Act, which came out at the end of last year, really helped set a new high bar for the power of QCDs. You can give up to $100,000 a year from your retirement account. That number will be indexed for inflation, which is great. And what it does is it helps retirees to reduce their taxable income and also make very, very tax efficient contributions to charitable organizations. One important reminder about QCDs is they must send the money, direct the money from their retirement account directly to you, the operating charity. If they take it in the form of an RMD, they'll lose some of these really, really powerful benefits. So what are our top 5 recommendations here? The first is, pick up where we left off with the last, which is focus on those relationships, right? QCD donors are really just donors. They're people that care about your organization, but they're able with your guidance to leverage a potentially underutilized source of funding for their charitable giving. Think about how you can engage older Americans in your mission, whether it's through volunteering or as donors. Helping them stay closer to you will, of course, inspire their giving both in their lifetime, but also in testamentary gifts. $84 trillion, say it again, $84 trillion is coming down the pike over the next 2 decades in wealth transfer. 13 trillion of that is already earmarked for charitable giving. I mean, that is a multiplier effect of the resources that are currently in the nonprofit ecosystem. So making sure that you're really building deep connectivity with this demographic is critical to make sure that you get your fair share, maybe more than your fair share of this historic wealth transfer. Again, make sure information about giving, effective giving strategies is on your website and readily available. In particular with QCDs, provide the coaching point around the critical importance of the direct distribution to the charitable organization. Do it through donor stories, do it just with technical information on your website. This is absolutely critical. And I always say, whenever you're developing a new fundraising strategy, always begin with the end in mind, which is being in a position to say thank you to a generous donor. So make stewardship planning your #1 priority to ensure that you have that culture of generosity, which will inspire repeat giving over time.
Awesome. Thanks, Diane. Before we dive into stock gifting, I want to restate the obvious. If you're one of the earlier ones to go out and solicit QCDs and DAF contributions, you're going to get a bigger share of your donors' wallets. It's amazing how many sites we look at every day where they just have credit card. Maybe they had PayPal to get really fancy. Those are great. You need those. Those are foundational. But where there's, if there's 13 trillion in wealth associated, already earmarked, that's for philanthropy. That's 26 years of what happens every year. There's literally a quarter century giving already allocated. It's there for you all to ask for. So hopefully there's some really, some light bulbs are going off and you're thinking about some easy steps you guys can take starting tomorrow. So let's talk about stock gifting. The thing I love about charitable stock gifting is half the US households own stock. They own about $30 trillion in stock today, maybe a little bit more. And for households over 45 or 50, most of their assets are in their investment accounts. It's not in their checking account. It's certainly not in their credit card availability, although that's where they generally give from per the inverted pyramids that Diane showed earlier. It's also one of the most tax advantaged ways to give, especially for people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, as well as the older generations too. What's unique about stock gifting, we've heard so many stories where a nonprofit would, a donor would reach out and say, I want to give you $10,000 in stock. They would reduce that amount by the capital gains tax and send the net proceeds to the nonprofit. And it's really taking money out of the nonprofit's pocket when you do that. Because if you donate stock instead of the cash from the sale of the stock, not only do you get to the big charitable deduction, but you can avoid the capital gains tax as a donor. So it's really a transfer of funds or wealth from, tax collectors, IRS, to the nonprofit. So as a nonprofit, you want to be asking for pre-tax gifts. Don't, pay us, give us your pre-tax gifts, give the money to us, not the government. I promise we can put it to better use. So this is really a high level, tutorial on why stock is so compelling. Stock donors, we have some pretty good data on them. Historically, they're 55 plus, so most of them are in the boomer and silent generation, highly educated homeowners. They tend to skew a little more coastal, not surprising. The average giving capacity for these folks is around 25K. It's a little bit less than what Diane showed earlier as the affluent givers. So it shows it's not just the super wealthy people that are donating stock. Again, anybody, generally speaking, over that's been professionally and saving money and putting money into the markets for the last couple of decades, even the last 10 years, it has big gains. So there's a lot of opportunity there. I like to put the markets in perspective too. It's been such a tumultuous couple of years after this crazy up and to the right run since the recession, the Great Recession, 2008, 2009. We now see the market coming back to approach the all-time high. And this time, just the last 13, 15 years, we've seen about 20 trillion in household wealth created. So this is a massive pot of funding that has largely been untapped. We say it's basically a biased and broken system today. It's been a 1% solution, the wealthiest 1% giving to the top 1% nonprofits. And it's due to a few things. One is a lack of awareness. Very few donors know about the benefits. So if you're informing them, you're going to get more mind share. What we also found is a lot of that when we started donating stock, we assumed every nonprofit could get a brokerage account. Not the case. Unfortunately, a lot of the brokerages, the retail brokers are unable to serve small nonprofits because there's a lot of compliance requirements with a nonprofit and monitoring that closely, and they don't build assets. They generally use the account to sell the stock and then move the cash into their checking account or their operating account, and that's not how brokers make money. So we found that there's a big underserved need just for a lot of charities and small nonprofits have been excluded from stock gifting altogether. And even those that we found that have received some stock, it's just not something most have been comfortable with. So you're not comfortable with it as a nonprofit because it's a little daunting or intimidating. And so you're not telling your donors, so they don't know about it. So it's a chicken or egg problem. And that's we also discovered is it's not a scalable system. It doesn't allow you to do things. The more you do it, scalability means the more we do, the less costly, the easier it is to do each one. It's the actual opposite. There are diseconomies of scale. It's a very manual intensive process for the nonprofit to process stock gifts. Generally, multiple people are touching each stock gift. We've measured it around 3 man hours per gift. So if you're trying to get hundreds of stock gifts in a year, you could do the math like, wow, that's like almost a full-time employee at some point. And unfortunately, not one person can do it. You need your treasurer or whoever's managing your brokerage account. You need someone else in accounting and then someone else in donor relations. So there's a lot of touches to do it. The biggest problem with stock gifting is this third point, though, the lack of information about the donor. We all assume we fill out a form for our broker, and we submit this and to give you 10 shares of Apple, here's our generous gift, that you would know that it came from us. And unfortunately, nonprofits do not get the donor's information. They just see stock show up in their account and they're kind of shaking, scratching their head like, who do we owe? Should we thank? Who should we be reaching out to? Donors are waiting for the acknowledgement, for the thank you note. It's normally not until they reach out asking, did you get my stock or can I get a receipt? Normally, it's not a very pleasant experience because there's no stewardship coming back to them until they raise their hand. And that's a huge problem as well. And so that turns into a poor donor experience. And this is the problem that really large nonprofits have. We talk to some of the top 100 nonprofits all the time, and their stock gifting becomes a donor relations concern because they can't reconcile, they can't acknowledge the gifts, they can't thank their donors. And this puts a lot of strain on those donor relationships. I'm not going to go through each of these steps, but 15 years ago, this was my experience. When I went through the process of making a stock gift to a scholarship fund that had given me a scholarship in college, it took me the better part of a week having to do research, contact them, contact my broker, fill out forms, get it over to them, wait anxiously to find out, yeah, my stock arrived. And this wasn't even a big gift. It was a lot to me, but it wasn't in the big picture, anything much smaller than average gifts that we see today. So a very broken, painful process for the donors. Also for the nonprofits, the experience is also incredibly unpleasant. It's a lot of work. And again, I'm not going to go through all this for the sake of time. All these slides are available and we're always happy to, help explain why this is such a broken system. So we've made it easy. Our whole goal with with founding Donate Stock 3 years ago is just to make charitable stock gifting accessible and easy for everybody, really to democratize it. So the smallest nonprofit or the most underserved donor could actually execute a tax advantage stock gifts, get the same relative benefits as the Jeff Bezos of the world. So for donors, think of it as an easy button for stock gifting, like PayPal for stock gifting is the best way to think about it. In a matter of minutes, donors can execute a gift. They get dashboard reporting, notifications. We provide a lot of content to help them better understand the benefits that you can leverage as well. And for nonprofits, it's just helping you do things better, faster, cheaper, more efficiently with fewer people. Automation, notifications, reporting. Best of all, you don't need a brokerage. We step a nonprofit called Donate Stock Charitable 2 years ago to serve basically as that kind of fiscal sponsor to convert stock to cash for charities that either don't have a brokerage account or just don't want to deal with it, and send the cash to them in days. And then arming them with all of the content they need to educate their donors, their board, their communities, and provide live support. What also is nice, and this thing Paro really loved about it, is there's no fee on board. You can sign up for free, use our tools, put our button on your site, start promoting it. We get paid when you do with a modest fee, about half what most are paying all in for credit card gifts. If you think about platform fees and merchant processing fees, our fees start at 3% and they go down based on how big or how many stock gifts you get. We also cap them on large gifts. So if it's a large gift, you don't have to worry about it. And it's not exclusive too. So if you have a brokerage account, maybe you have a few board members that are sending you really big gifts each year, that's fine. Our goal is not to get paid on those. It's to help you 10x that or 100x your stock gifting volume over time. I'm not, I put that to kind of demonstrate either for a donor or a financial advisor, the user experience is really important in the donation process. So we try to make it again like PayPal, but for stock gifting. And they click on the button on your site, they say, I'm a donor. We provide instructions, explain there's no cost to them. We don't ask for login for their credentials for their brokerage. We stress security, privacy. We don't sell data, period. We try to make it easy for them just to initiate the gift. If they're new, they tell us who they are. If they're an existing donor, they just log in. Then one time we need them to tell us some information about the brokerage from which the shares will be transferred out. So the donor's brokerage. Again, not login credentials. There's no place to put them. So we don't want them and we don't need them. We just need to get the information that would be on a check. And then they tell us what securities they want to donate. If they want to do 20 shares of Apple, they can select the first in, last in specific lot, make it easy for them to select the right tax advantage lot. They hit next and then basically check out, sign it, hit submit. We take that, we send that transfer authorization to their donor on behalf of the donor, to their brokerage on behalf of the donor, and then initiate the transfer of stock from the donor's brokerage to the nonprofit's brokerage. If it's kind of illustrated here. If it's most cases, even our large clients would rather just have us process it for them because we don't charge any extra to convert the stock to cash and send in the proceeds and acknowledge the donor for them. So saving all that back end processing through our 501c3 and then sending the money to the nonprofit. So receive money in days, donor gets acknowledged, they get timely acknowledgement, your stock's received, here's the value. Here's your acknowledgement letter and your dashboard, but donors and nonprofits and their advisors all get a dashboard. So they all have transparency into it. This is, to me, probably my favorite slide when we talk about stock gifting is World Central Kitchen was one of our first big kind of nonprofits that signed up with us in December of 21. Last year, in their first full year with us, they grew the stock gifting proceeds by 1500% in 1 year. Now, it's not by itself probably fully, I don't think you can expect that. They did raise a ton of money during the Ukraine conflict in early 22. But what's really, I think the most compelling stat here is the relative growth. So prior to working with us, stock comprised about 1.3% of total proceeds raised every year. 1 year later, it's approaching 9%. Average stock gift for them is over 10,000. They converted a lot of people who were either doing cash or ACH transfers or large credit card gifts into stock, which is more tax advantage for the donor and better for World Central Kitchen to get the pre-tax gifts. They also save hundreds or thousands of hours of man hours in processing stock gifts. So making it really easy for them to help better ways to give in ways that are more really rewarding and have greater impact for World Central Kitchen too. So this is my last slide. This is really like how to get started. So we have actually a partnership with Aparo. We'll share with you this link, but if you click on that, Aparo will be tracked in as the referring party. So we'll be able to track, kind of work with Aparo to track how many of the nonprofits they support and are trying to help and enable are actually signing up and receiving stock gifts. So our goal is to help you unlock it and grow your program. You can go to if you click on this link, and we'll share this with you in the chat. In fact, Kyle, if you're on there, maybe you could share this in the chat as well, so that you can click through. You search for your nonprofit, either your name or your EIN, and then you just claim your page on our site. That's how you get started. We have 1.3 million nonprofit pages, so if you're a 501c3 in good standing with the IRS, you already have a page on our site. You can register with us. It just takes about 15 minutes to go through the whole process. Then you can actually implement the button on your site, inform your donors of the assets we provide, and literally start receiving stock gifts. We have so many. I'll wait till the Q&A session, but some great anecdotal stories about nonprofits all over the country just send an email to the donors like, guess what, we can now receive stock gifts. And so many people say, wow, I had no idea. I've got a ton of stock. I'd rather give you stock. I didn't know you took it. So this is really the opportunity for nonprofits. With that, I will turn it back to Allie for the Q&A part.
Okay. Well, thank you, Steve and Diane. That was very informative. And I know I'll reiterate, everyone will get a copy of this deck. I'm going to roll into the questions. So Diane, what are the first steps nonprofits should take in exploring and incorporating non-cash donations into their fundraising efforts?
Well, it's some on the line, since this is a Charlotte crowd may know, I am a recovering lawyer. I do not practice law in my role at Bank of America, but legalese is my native tongue. And I'm always going to say, start with your gift acceptance policy, right? And the reason why I say it is not only for the compliance reasons, but it also really empowers and educates the staff and the board first about how important these non-cash gifts are. And a really great gift acceptance policy is one that not only goes through all the different asset classes that could be considered, right? I'll just repeat them again. Obviously, publicly traded securities being a key one, but also real estate, commercial, residential, farmland, timberland, oil and gas, other mineral rights, business interests, which can be so powerful, particularly in pre-sale planning for a private company that's going to go public eventually. And fine art. I mean, the amount of money that's held in fine art and collectibles is really quite extraordinary in this country. So really beginning with the gift acceptance policy that goes through each of those classes and the specific considerations that would be unique to that particular asset type. But also importantly, understanding who are the decision makers. It really should not be on the shoulders of frontline fundraisers to make the call with their donor about whether the organization should accept a gift or graciously decline a gift, whether it's because of risk, carrying cost, or other expenses. There are reasons why you would decline some of these gifts other than publicly traded securities. And so really deciding who makes that call ahead of time, typically somebody in the finance office or a small group of board members would be the go-to. And then also the reporting around it. It doesn't have to be unnecessarily complicated, but for certain non-cash gifts, again, other than securities, which is really the easiest non-cash gift, there are particular requirements with the IRS that you'll want to make sure that your staff understands. And then it's a wonderful document to be public facing because again, it helps educate and really inspire donors that may feel very cash constrained, particularly in this inflationary environment. Cash really is at a premium. And so it allows donors that really do want to be generous to your organization
to encourage and educate their donors and supporters to make non-cash donations? Are there communication strategies that would work particularly well in promoting these types of donations? That was a twofold question.
Yeah, I'll start with the first one.
Okay.
Make it easy for donors when they visit your site to know there are other ways to give. A lot of them have the red donate button on their page. It sends them right in the funnel for their credit card. That's just kind of, and we're kind of Pavlovian that we just respond. We say, oh, I'll donate and go there, not even realize the other ways to give. The ones that have been best at really expanding their funnel for how you can give are ones that put, prominent, here's ways to give. And even in the donate form, there are other ways to give. You can give through your DAF, a QCD, stock, crypto. Click here to our ways to give page. Put that in there. So, because a lot of people would much rather give you a more tax advantage non-cash asset. You just have to remind them and make it very conspicuous in the conversion process that there are other options, right? More tax advantage ways to give. And then obviously making that experience as pleasant as possible for the donor and having control on it. Well, so those are really critical, and having really good communications. We have a couple examples, like I think of like Shriners Hospitals for Children. If you go to lovetherescue.org, built out a really nice stock gifting page explaining the benefits. And we arm them with all that content, which is great, because we built all this content saying you don't have to become an expert in talking about stock gifting or the benefits to donors. You just copy paste, put it in your own words, put it on your website, your ways to give page, put a link on your donate page, and incorporate it into your materials. We found that, like I said, there's I think about an organization in Florida I met one of the fundraisers at a luncheon. They signed up and they just sent an email to their donors and their board saying, hey, by the way, you can take stock gifts now. And they had 6 figures in stock gifts within 2 weeks. I mean, and this is a small organization. Same with there's another large organization called Chapman Partnership in Miami working with homeless and healthcare services. And they did the same thing. I think they have a $50 million endowment fund and had never received stock. And they just like, wow, this is a whole new source of funding. And same situation, put it out. One of their board members saw that, said, oh, that's fantastic. I didn't know we could do stock. I have a ton of it. We have, so many stories. There's a really organization. I'm actually going to their fundraiser this week, Friday. Last year, they had some really cool auction prizes. The big one was a weekend in Montana with Rip from Yellowstone, like a tour of the set, not romantic, but like a tour of the set for your family and all that. And they put it out there before, like, you can use stock to bid on this item. And one of their benefactors said, well, I'm just letting you know, I'm going to win this. Whatever the auction is, whatever it is, I will win it. And she ended up paying over $200,000 for that at a live auction. Could have never done that with cash. So it was, it just turned in, it's just such it was also her QCD. Like she, at least the 100K of it that she was allowed to deduct. So there's so many ways you can use it. Just think about, expanding any way you're asking people to give, whether it's sponsoring a gala, buying a table, attending a live event or a golf tournament. You just have to allow for what the commercial value of the gift is and make sure that is reduced from the amount that's deductible. But you can use it for anything you use cash for in terms of stock. There's a few more restrictions on other, DAFs have a few instructions. Let Diane speak to that as the expert, things you can and can't do. QCDs, you can pretty much, 100K to anybody you want. If you've got a $5 million IRA and you're realizing your RMD on that every year is $100,000. Here's a way to reduce that, and that's reducing the adjusted gross income too, not just below the line itemization. So it means you actually can be more eligible for Social Security benefits if you reduce that that adjusted gross income. So there's just so many ways to help your donors give smarter and be the ones, and I think back to building those relationships Diane was speaking about. If you're providing them really sound advice, now you have to caveat that we're not financial advisors. Talk to your advisor, right? We're not do not make decisions based on this, but go talk to somebody and you'll learn that there's a lot of really unknown, unrealized opportunities there. So it's just communicating, just emails, social. We have issue a press release, put out in your community. You never know who will see that. I go, oh wow, we didn't know that you're doing this and you receive stock. So there's a lot of ways to get there.
And telling the donor stories, right? Yes, you want to give them technical advice, guidance. Their advisors will give them the advice, but tell the stories, right? About the why they did it, why they chose the QCD, the programmatic focus, and then people can see themselves in those stories and be inspired by their example.
It's all about educating, and I think to all of you out there, I think it's just starting the conversation with all of your donors and what is possible, because anything is possible. And with a little bit of education, like you've heard today, and you'll have the deck, just sharing it with your donors and weaving, like Diane said, with the stories. Okay, I know we have 5 minutes. I want to throw in one more if we have time for both of you, and you guys decide who goes first. What should nonprofits communicate to donors regarding the tax benefits? Because I think this is an area that actually, the donor is going to like, because it's what's in their interest, as well as getting money to their favorite charity. So who wants to start?
I'll let the expert go ahead.
Okay.
Well,
Let the lawyer tell you.
You want to be careful about the way in which you communicate. I mean, I think that if you go back to the deck, right? Steve's example, right, around just breaking it down, the $10,000 gift, like with all of the right caveats. I'm assuming this tax rate and this, I think that you can provide illustrations that are representative. But again, I want to say two things about it. Is that you don't be, as a frontline fundraiser, don't get hung up on having conversations around sources of funding for gifts because you're not a tax expert, right? You're not called upon to be a tax expert. Like, you just need to know enough to know that this security needs to be appreciated. Right? It has to have increased in value, right? And that person may have a lot of it, like especially if it's a concentrated stock or something like that. If they were a longtime employee of a publicly traded company, where it might make sense for them to look to that source of assets. So, and again, they'll be talking with their tax advisors around how to make it work. So I think, yes, on the website, have some illustrations, and for the frontline fundraisers, be aware of the types of donors that you should be looking for. But then, of course, really focus them back on the mission, right? Because if you look back at our data around why people give, people don't give to save on taxes during their lifetime. I mean, yes, in estate planning, are there strategies specifically designed to avoid state taxes? Yes, absolutely. But in lifetime, donors want to give in a smart way, but they give from their personal values. So always, really stay focused in your conversations with donors around that alignment between their priorities and the needs of your organization and the communities that you're trying to serve.
I got nothing. She
You
nailed
got
it.
nothing. She took. Well, we only have.
Can't build on perfection.
So we only have 3 minutes here, and I know we have to wrap everything up. Steve, Diane, thank you very much. I think this was a wealth of information. I encourage all of you to look over the deck and try it. Like, anything is possible, and this non-cash giving is a win-win. It is a win for your donors as well as the nonprofits, and we can help all of the community rise. So with that, I will hand it back to Yan-Ting, and thank you guys very, very, very much for today.
Thanks, Sally.
Yes.
Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. We do have 2 minutes left, and I want to use up as much time as possible. So I do want to throw in one last question, if that's okay. This is directed at Diane. And I think it matches kind of what you talked about with the matching the values of the donor. But particularly with DAF, the question is, how do nonprofits access the potential of DAF? They feel buried within investment houses that hold the funds. How do we reach the passion and the values of the owner of the DAF so that we can align their interests? 1 minute left.
So the most important thing to remember is a DAF is really just a charitable giving account associated with an individual, right? And so remember, 85% of the funding is from individuals, right? That 15% of corporate and foundation, where you would have a formal process where you're trying to uncover the foundation that may have a set of giving priorities that align with you. You send something in that's almost cold. That's a very small part of the universe. Most of donor advised fund holders are the people you know, right? And so one thing that I didn't say that's really, really critically important, and it seems obvious, but people miss this, is making sure that you're, and this would go if you're using the donate stock intermediary for clearing the stock also, make sure you give the donor credit, right? Don't send them a tax letter because they don't get a tax letter. They've already received that from the donor advised fund sponsor, but say thank you to them and soft credit them in your system. And you should have a way to pull reports on donor advised fund holders that have given to you in the past. Because one of the things to know about them is they're not beholden to a December 31 deadline, right? Because they've already taken their deduction. So they're really year-round donors. So I hope that's helpful.
For that answer. I want to echo Allie. Thank you, Steve, Diane, for this tremendous presentation. I know I learned a lot. Allie, thank you so much for your time and moderating this conversation. Everyone else, yes, please expect an email from me. I should have it to you by the end of the week. It'll include the link to the recording as well as the slide deck. Donate Stock did provide a lot of resources, so I will be including that so you guys can take a look through that. That's it for today. Hope everyone has a great rest of the day. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Sure.